The long-awaited Dead Space remake is just over a month away, but in the meantime, a little game called the Callisto Protocol has come out that looks eerily similar. So is this the beginning of a new survival horror franchise that could rival Dead Space, or is this just something to kind of tide us over until that remake comes out? What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the Game Chamber with another game review, and this time it is the Callisto Protocol. I've been live streaming for about 3 or 4 days on the Callisto Protocol, playing through the storyline for the first time, and this is a game that I did not have on my radar for very long, but the more that it got closer to the release, the more people that were asking me about it, everybody hyping it up as this Dead Space contender, it was something that really started to interest me, and so I checked this thing out going in completely blind, not knowing what the story was, not watching any trailers or any gameplay footage, and by the end of this 8 to 10 hour game, I gotta say, it was fun, it was entertaining, but it could have been so much more. Starting right off with the positives on the Callisto Protocol, the first thing I gotta praise is just the atmosphere that they create and achieve in this game. Now, with survival horror, atmosphere is everything. You want to have that dark, eerie feeling. You want to have that tension-fueled vibe throughout the entire game if you can achieve that, and I think the Callisto Protocol does do that. From the moment that you are set into this Blackgate prison and you are unleashed upon this quite literal hell on earth that is going on in this situation, there's this dark, nasty, wet, bloody, gory vibe that is achieved from the beginning all the way through to the end of the game. From the way that the settings of the games are designed, from the way that the monsters and the creature designs, and the visceral version of the combat that we have here, both in a shooting front as well as the hand-to-hand combat, through some of the details of the story that come together by the end of it. It's a game that definitely drips in that classic survival horror atmosphere, and so if you're in the game for that, if that's the thing you're trying to achieve, that's the thing you're trying to experience as a gamer, that's one of the best achievements with the Callisto Protocol. And aiding that along the way is the graphical performance, which I think this game actually looks really fucking good. This game looks like a legit next-gen survival horror game. That seems weird to say that, being that we are now 2 years plus into the next generation, but there's still plenty of games that come out that still kind of feel like they belong to last generation, with maybe just a little bit more spit shine on it if you play on modern consoles. But Callisto Protocol looks gorgeous. It looks gross. It looks insane. I mean, just to the details of the sweat dripping down the main character's face the further you get along the story, or the gore effects, the death effects especially. The death sequences in this game are some of the best I've ever seen, to the point where, at least for the first half of my playthrough the first time, I wasn't even mad when I died, because it was just so awesome and gnarly watching my character get torn apart in these animations that it was almost worth taking a death or two just to see that come to life. Or to death. And going along with the graphics, I think all of the performance capture is damn good in this as well. Your main character is played by Josh Duhamel, who you will know from Transformers or the old show Las Vegas, and I think he's a very capable lead. And it's been amazing to see, as the generations have gone on, how good video games have gotten at just recreating the actual face of actors, to where I had people just joining my live streams that didn't know what the game was, and they're like, is that Josh Duhamel? You also have Karen Fukuhara here, who you'll know as Kamiko, I believe is the name of the character from The Boys, and Sam Witwer, who is a guy that I have always loved. I always love seeing him pop up. Of course, you know him as Starkiller, and more recently as Deacon St. John in Days Gone. Days Gone 2, someday, please. And so Callisto Protocol really does achieve kind of that blurring of the lines between a video game and a full-length movie, because as you kind of go into these cinematic sections and you get to see these characters come to life and interact with each other, there's times where you might forget you're playing a video game because the graphics are so fucking awesome. Now moving on to the mixed aspects of the Callisto Protocol, and the main one for me is the combat. Now, this is the main thing that sets this apart from Dead Space, which we're going to talk about it, but that's the easiest comparison in the world that you're going to make, is the Callisto Protocol versus Dead Space. And where this game differs itself is that there's much more of a focus on combat. There's much more of a focus on hand-to-hand, visceral combat, on doing a lot of swinging around with this baton that you have, trying to pair that with gun attacks, and not so much on the dismemberment of the enemies, but using these different things, including the gravity little glove that you have, to kind of come up with these combos to take out these enemies in a variety of ways. And so on one hand, I actually like the fact that we get a survival horror game where you have these guns in using your kind of artillery, but it's not necessarily the best option all the time. You have these other methods of taking out these enemies. You can also sneak past them. You can do stealth kills. You know, you can throw them into spikes, throw them into machinery that's spinning around and watch them get chopped into a million pieces. You can launch them over the side of a bridge and they're just gone. And so there did achieve a little bit of a variety in the gameplay that way, and it does make it stand out amongst the other survival horror games where it's pretty much just exclusively shooting. On the negative side of the coin, though, that's about 85% of what you're going to be doing in this game is combat. There's not really any exploration. There's no backtracking or puzzle solving or any of those elements that I would say are pretty integral to classic survival horror. They're pretty much just shoved aside, and it's all focused on combat. And so if you're into the combat, that's a good thing. If you're somebody that wants something more than combat, you're going to find yourself feeling very monotonous with the gameplay that's available to you in the Callisto Protocol. And there's one other aspect of the combat that unfortunately I'm going to have to talk about in my negative section, but overall, that's the biggest thing that's the mixed for me. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it based off of the combat. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, as if I haven't mentioned it a dozen times at this point. This game is Dead Space in everything but name. From the look of it, to the way that the camera is placed, to the UI design with the health bar and everything on the back of the character's neck, to the gunplay, to the stomping and dismembering of the enemies to gain new items, to the upgrade system. I mean, this thing is Dead Space from start to finish. And that's because some of the lead designers of this game were some of the heaviest players in the creation of the original Dead Space. And so there's going to be a lot of people that are going to enjoy the fact that this is a lot like Dead Space, because if we weren't getting a remake in just about a month, it's been quite a while since we've experienced that franchise, but there's going to be probably even more people that are going to look at this as a blatant ripoff. And just like with the combat, that's going to come down to who you are and how you experience this. I'm totally okay with a game feeling very reminiscent of something that I love, as long as they do it well. And I think that Callisto Protocol does do the Dead Space stuff very well. But it's Dead Space stuff. It's nothing new. It's nothing innovative. I mean, even some of the enemies later on in the game are straight ripoff of The Last of Us. You have these blind enemies that you have to sneak past and not make any sounds that are 95% like the clickers. And so while the gameplay and the overall experience of this game is fun to me because it's familiar of things that I really like, there's also a bit of disappointment that comes with that the Callisto Protocol didn't carve out its own path and give us this potential beginning of a new awesome franchise that is very unique and different for the genre. And the final mixed aspect is going to be the length of the game. Now, I'll be honest with you, the last game that I played was God of War Ragnarok, where I dumped about 52, 53 hours into that thing before I got the platinum. A couple of games before that was Elden Ring. That was around the same amount of gameplay to not get anywhere close to the platinum. And so I have a little bit of a desire for a bit of a shorter, more streamlined game experience. And this game is going to take you about 8 to 10 hours, depending on your skill level, depending on the difficulty, and depending on how much you do some of the exploration that is in this game that's not exactly encouraged. And so for me, I actually enjoyed the fact that I completed this game in a couple of days, and it took me one more day to get the platinum. It was kind of refreshing for me. There's going to be others that are going to look at that $70 price tag and go, motherfucker, there better be more than 8 to 10 hours of gameplay for that price. There's no New Game Plus, there's no chapter select, there's no alternate modes, there's no new difficulty modes that are unlocked after you beat the game. When you beat the main game, you've experienced everything this game has to show you, and that is it. And so it's a bit of an ask for this game to be $70. You know, in a time where games like God of War Ragnarok that we just got are giving you so much bang for your buck, and then this game gives you less than like an eighth of what that game has available, that is frustrating. And I don't really know where to fit this as far as a category in this review, but the fact that there wasn't a New Game Plus really annoyed the fuck out of me. Everybody on my live stream was telling me that they had announced that it's going to be coming out like mid-February, and I'm completely ignorant to game design, so forgive me if I just don't understand how difficult it is to implement a New Game Plus mode, but that seems like something that should be pretty easy to add into your game. And the fact that you have a short experience that is absolutely impossible to upgrade and build out all of your weapons and all of your skills to the top tier in one playthrough, and there's no way to start a new game with everything you've achieved from the beginning. You want us to wait 2 months before we can experience the game again in the fashion that we should, I don't see too many people hanging on to this game and popping it back in February excited to finally experience New Game Plus. That to me just seems like they rushed the game out because they knew Dead Space was going to be coming before they could finish it. I mean, it's a complete game. It's not buggy. There's not shit here that's glitched out. There's nothing that needs 1,000 patches like so many of the modern games that we've seen. They've completed the main game, but not having a New Game Plus really sticks out like a sore thumb. And now moving on to the negatives, and unfortunately, as much of a combat focus this game has, the way that they designed the control scheme for the blocking and the dodging was so wonky. You don't have a dodge button or a block button. It's all mapped to the left directional stick. And so when you have an enemy coming at you, you have to flick the stick to the left or flick the stick to the right to dodge that respective direction, or hold it back to block. And when you are fighting one person, it works very well because they're coming at you, they tell all of their attacks, and it actually works pretty fluid. But there's very rare occasions when you're going to be fighting one enemy at a time. And when you are fighting multiple enemies, that controller scheme absolutely fails because you're going to be dodging one person and running face first into another person. You got somebody on this side trying to hit you while you're focused on this guy, and there's no like directional mapping as far as how to lock on to a different enemy.
Man, this is pissing me the fuck off.
And even an element that's introduced later on to try to kind of make this synergy between your hand-to-hand combat and your gun combat, to where if you stagger an enemy with your baton, it does this auto lock onto one of their weak points, and then you can just pull out a gun and quick draw and shoot them. And that thing rarely worked for me because while the reticle would come up, the enemy would always be turned around or knocked sideways or turning backwards, and I would very, very rarely actually hit the thing that the reticle is on. And so most times I would fire really quick, waste a bullet, and then have to stand there and wait for the enemy to face me and then aim up the shot myself. Also was absolutely infuriated that this thing did not have a mapping system. Now, on one side, it's a very linear game, which is something else that's going to bother a lot of people. There's not a ton of exploration, and the moments where there are exploration, it's not like you really have a ton of backtracking or a gigantic spider of hallways that you need to navigate. But for me, I'm somebody that loves to loot. I love to go into all the optional rooms and find the collectibles and find the items and the money and the different pickups that you can find there. And so many times throughout this game, you come to a crossroads to where you have a path to the left and a path to the right. And those of us that love to loot, you know the anxiety I'm talking about, where you decide one path and you walk down it, and then all of a sudden you realize that you accidentally chose the main path, and now there's a cinematic that has cut off everything behind you and you don't get to experience what the hell was in that optional room. The only way that you could have bypassed that was with a mapping system, or even something like the Dead Space game that you loved so much, where you click on something and it gives you a little reticle that shows you the main path, and you go, oh, so obviously that shit's optional. I thought the story was fine throughout. There's not really anything unique or anything innovative about it. The story actually kind of takes a backseat for the most part, and it's just about the gameplay and the atmosphere and the experience. Unfortunately, the way that they decided to wrap up the story looks like they're either leaving the actual climax of the story for DLC, or they just had no idea how to wrap up the story, and so they just end it with a bullshit jump scare and a see you next time. And that's not good enough for me. Like, I think I audibly said out loud, that is fucking lame, whenever I was live streaming and experienced it, because it's one of the laziest endings to a horror game I've ever seen.
Oh, come on. That's a lame fucking ending.
But the biggest negative for me by a landslide was that the Callisto Protocol has possibly the most obnoxious difficulty spike that I have ever played in recent memory. This game, I was playing on the hardest difficulty. I expected a little bit of frustration. I expected to die a lot. I expected to have to hone my skills to get through the length of the campaign. And through the first 6.5 chapters, I navigated that pretty well. And the last 2.5 chapters of this game, the difficulty spike shoots up so quickly, so rapidly, and stays at its peak through the entire of the rest of the game that it was absolutely fucking infuriating. There's a point towards the end of chapter 6 where you are on this platform that is shooting through this tunnel and you are stuck in this level for about 5 to 10 minutes as just endless waves of enemies come. And after you finally get through that endless wave of enemy, that's enough frustration as it is, you get introduced to the first mini boss of the game, and you have to beat that boss 3 more times throughout the last 2 chapters of the game, which says something about creativity for one, but it's absolutely aggravating whenever you realize how frustrating this boss is. And the first time you triumph over him, you have 3 more times after that. And from that moment forward, the last 2 chapters of this game are just like the most insane level of difficulty that they could think of at a constant rate. I spent the first 3 live streams of this game praising it, not understanding a lot of the criticisms for it, saying, holy crap, this is actually really good, recommending it to everybody that was asking me how it was, that were just kind of dropping in for a minute. I spent almost the entire final 4th live stream swearing and slamming my hands into my fucking chair and just going, what the fuck were they thinking when they designed this?
Oh, fuck you! So sick of this bullshit. Yeah, come on, get your fucking licks in too. Come on. Go time, bitch.
And again, I'm somebody that played on the hardest difficulty. I often do that with games. I like a challenge. I embrace a challenge, but there is a line to be drawn between healthy challenge, fun challenge, and just plain fucking infuriation. And I honestly think they just knew that there wasn't a whole lot of content available in the game. There wasn't a whole lot of variety in the story, in the settings available, in the gameplay, and so they just tried to stretch out your experience during those last 2.5 chapters by making you die continuously. So about 45 minutes to an hour of gameplay becomes 3 to 4 hours of gameplay. And I'm not the only one that felt that way, because a lot of the people that had already beaten the game that were watching me while I was live streaming were all saying the same thing. Like, this game tanks in the last couple of chapters. This game falls off a cliff in the past couple of chapters. This thing, what were they thinking when they designed the last couple of chapters of this game? And it's true. I don't know what happened, because I'm telling you, my score was like at least an entire star higher up until that last couple of chapters. So overall, guys, do I recommend the Callisto Protocol? If you are somebody that loves Dead Space, if you're somebody that loves survival horror, if you're somebody that watched a gameplay live stream or you've seen a gameplay trailer and it looks like a lot of fun to you, and an 8 to 10 hour experience seems like a good deal for $70, then yes, I would say to check it out. But for most people, I would say to either wait on the Dead Space remake or wait for the Callisto Protocol to drop in price at least $20. It's a good game, it's a capable game, but it could have been so awesome if a couple of things were tweaked, if a couple of things were done better, and if there was more gameplay and content available for the price tag that they chose to charge. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for the playlist of all of the new video games that I have reviewed thus far in 2022. And I'm also going to put a link to my God of War Ragnarok, which is my most recent review, up here for you to check out as well. Please like and share this video and hit that subscribe button. And as always, remember, the Game Chamber is Commander Shepard's favorite channel on the YouTubes.